Hello, World of Warcraft! This is Thomas with the WoW Dungeon, and in this video I'm going to be continuing my series on kiting melee, or kiting in general, as a marksman hunter. So this guide is going to be how to kite an unholy death knight. So we're going to go over the specifics of how to kite these guys, these monsters of a class right now, and what you can do to slow them from killing you. Alright. So let's start the video. So, I also want to, before I forget, I also want to explain that, in my opinion, there are three different types of unholy death knights. There are bad death knights that don't know how to play their class, so that means they're not doing damage, or they don't know how to heal themselves. There are good death knights that know how to deal damage, but maybe don't know how to heal themselves very well. And then there's great death knights, and these are the guys that know how to do damage and know how to heal themselves. If you're versing a good death knight, you have a good chance to win, one-on-one. If you're versing a great death knight, forget about it. Forget about it. So this guide is going to be specifically directed towards kiting great death knights and hopefully providing you with the kiting ability to take down good death knights. So let's start the video. So, unholy death knights. They have three categories of where their spells go in that I've put in personally. The three categories are damage, defensives, and utility, which is pretty much the same for every single class. So I'm going to break up these important abilities into these three categories. To start off, I'm going to go and talk about damage. Unholy death knights don't need to stay on top of you to do damage. The reason why is the majority of their damage is disease-based, which means that they're going to have dots on you, which is damage over time. And as a hunter, that's very important because that means that you're just going to be sitting there taking damage most of the time. So they don't have to sit on you to do damage. There are three important abilities, with the major one being Gargoyle. So Gargoyle is a 3-minute cooldown, and it will drop from the sky a gargoyle that will just rain terror down onto you for 40 seconds. Be very careful when a gargoyle's out. This means that the Death Knight is looking to do as much damage as possible, and you need to get the hell away from that guy. The other important damaging ability is the Death Knight's quote-unquote kill shot. The reason why I say quote-unquote is it isn't like a traditional kill shot which is where the enemy is at a certain percentage of health and you just hit this button and it does a lot of damage, like a kill shot for a marksman. The kill shot for the Death Knight is called Soul Reaper, and what Soul Reaper do is it'll put a dot or a effect on the target for 6 seconds. It will do some upfront damage, and when it finishes out that 6 seconds, if you as the hunter are below 35%, it will deal a massive amount of damage to you. The reason why this is important is that, let's say you're at 40% health. If the Death Knight hits you with the Soul Reaper, and during that 6 seconds you fall below 35%, and then let's say you're like, oh no, so you pop deterrents, guess what? That Soul Reaper's still on you, and you're still going to get hit with it for a lot of damage. So that's important to recognize, that you don't really want to get very low when versing an unholy Death Knight. Now the third ability that's important is Death Coil. It's the Death Knight's main ranged attack. So this is how he dumps his runic power, which is kind of like his focus, which he uses to use attacks. And it can shoot out at 40 yards range, so it's a very long ranged attack. On top of that, it also works with his Lichborn, which is a defensive of his, which I'll be going over next. Alright, so for the second category of what makes up a Death Knight is his defensives. Death Knights have very strong defensives and are known as almost like one of the hardest classes to kite because they have so many ways to get out of CC. Death Knights have Lichborn, their tier 5 talent tree, which will give them substantial healing. Desecrated Ground, which is in another talent tree, which most Death Knights take. They obviously have their Trinket. They have AntiMagic Shell, which I will go over in more depth later. It's a very important ability versus Hunters. And Icebound Fortitude, also known as IBF, which will make them immune to stuns and reduce their damage taken by 20%. So these are the really important defensives that you should make yourself aware of anytime you go up against Death Knight. Now the third category of like compartment of a Death Knight is utility. Death Knights have Death Grip, which I really don't need to explain further what Death Grip does. They have Asphyxiate, and they have a Dark Smaculum, which I won't go over that much because it's not that important specifically versus a Hunter or most melee in general. They also have Death Strike. I put Death Strike in there because it provides damage and heals them, so just be wary of that. I'll link up the ability into the scene. Most of the time you will see Death Knights running with Asphyxiate, which is on their third talent tree, and it's a 5-second stun on a 30-second cooldown, so very powerful. Alright, so before I actually go into the general strategy for kiting, I know you want to hear it, but this is important, I want to go over the AntiMagic Shell. AntiMagic Shell is probably the biggest defensive a Death Knight has versus a Hunter, and let me read the tooltip to you. It surrounds the Death Knight in an AntiMagic Shell for 5 seconds, 45-second cooldown, absorbing 75% of all magical damage, and preventing application of harmful magical effects. Damage absorbed generates runic power. So what this means is that he's going to absorb 75% of all magical damage, which means your chimeras. So on top of that, it prevents the application of harmful magic effects. These include Binding Shot and Narrow Escape talent from your Disengage. So if he has AntiMagic Shell up, disengaging while it's up, and throwing a Binding Shot or a Freezing Trap on him while he has that up is going to be wasted. He is going to go right through it and going to keep beasting charging at you. Now, two things to know about AntiMagic Shell. AntiMagic Shell does not prevent him from being hit with Explosive Trap and being, boom, knocked back. On top of that, Concussive Shot will always apply to the Death Knight whether he has AntiMagic Shell up or not. So, when he has AntiMagic Shell up, Explosive Trap, Concussive Shot. Keep him away from you. Alright, so how do you know what to do in specific situations? Well, there's only a couple things that you really need to remember. The main thing is Disengage versus Death Grip. Death Grip is on a, let's see what it is, 25-second cooldown. Your Disengage is on a 20-second cooldown. On top of that, he has Chained Ice, which is always instant, and he can pretty much apply this at will. So just be wary of that. Now, always save Disengage for the Death Grip. The last thing you want to do is to disengage and get Death Gripped right back to the Death Knight. Because then if you Explosive Trap, what can he do? He could put a Chain of Ice on you, put AMS up, the AntiMagic Shell, rush you, lock you down, and just start beating the crap out of you. And by the time you're ready to do something about it, boom, Asphyxiate for 5 seconds and just murder. So, the big general rule of thumb is to save the Disengage, keep as much distance as possible, and save the Disengage for the Death Grip, because then you're on a better foot when he's so far away from you, rooted, and that you're just getting away. The second thing that I would mention is knowing whether or not AntiMagic Shell is up or not. If AntiMagic Shell is up, use Explosive Trap and Concussive Shot to gain distance. Otherwise, if it's not up, try to freeze him or Binding Shot him to keep your distance. Always try to keep Concussive Shot up, but those two should be used as much as possible. So now, Deterrence and Trinket. When do you use these? Well, sometimes the Death Knight will try to asphyxiate. If you're giving him a tough time, the Death Knight will try to asphyxiate you from a distance in order to keep up on you. At this point, just use your Trinket and keep running away from him. I would recommend it in arenas, but if you're in battlegrounds, that's what I recommend doing, is just blowing through your trinket and then continually put distance. The reason why I say that is because it's on a 30-second cooldown. He's going to keep asphyxiating you, so you might as well just keep your distance as much as possible. So the time that I would recommend to deterrence is when he's on top of you and you really need to wait for some cooldowns to come back, or if you just really don't want him to hit you. Roar of Sacrifice is not going to be as important versus Death Knight because it's so much dot damage rather than critical strikes. So in essence, if you find yourself having to use deterrence, use it to keep gaining momentum and keep getting away from him. Ideally, you want to use a deterrence with a Master's Call that's glyphed, so for 8 seconds or the full duration of your deterrence, you're able to keep putting distance on that guy because you're moving so much faster than he is. So I want to make sure that I'm very clear when I say that you really don't want to be put in a situation where you are 1v1 a Unholy Death Knight. The reason is that he can outlast your kiting as a marksman hunter. He can heal himself for long periods of time and just wait you out with the dot damage. Your Spirit Bond is not going to heal you enough to guarantee that you'll survive his damage. On top of that, he has so many ways to counter your damage that it's just going to be a long waiting game. What your goal should be, whether it's in battlegrounds or arenas, I'm not talking about duels because it's not balanced around duels. The game is not balanced around duels. I mean, just go Beastmaster if you want to win duels. If you're in BGs or arenas, the best thing that you can do is to kite the DK if you're by yourself and live as long as possible, so that way you can get help from other people. If you can kite the DK for long periods of time, eventually someone's going to come around and help you. And in arena, you have 2 other partners that can help peel, making the Death Knight useless. So keep that in mind. No, you're not going to go into a duel with these guides and just start wrecking on DKs. It's not going to happen. They are too beefy right now. But what it will help you do is survive long enough in arena and battlegrounds so that you can get help from your teammates and prevent his damage. So just keep that in mind. So that is my hunter guide to kiting Unholy Death Knights. I'm hoping that this guide helps you understand the Death Knight class a little bit better, and in the future allows you to kite some good Death Knights and to be able to survive long enough to get some help from your friends. Alright, I hope to see you next time. Give me some comments and some feedbacks on what you thought about the video. It's always appreciated to hear back what people think, and it helps me with my next videos to either do more of what I'm doing that you like, or do less of what I'm doing that you might not. So before I sign off, check out this little scene that I had in a BG just yesterday. It was really fun, and I'll see you next time. Wow, that was awesome. That was awesome.